Utah and Houston face off for the first time as Big 12 opponents. What are the biggest storylines heading into this matchup? The keys to victory for both sides and who ends up coming out on top? We're breaking it all down. It's a Big 12 battle of the two schools with interlocking letters on today's Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougs crossover.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. We are both part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If this is your first time stopping by our shows, make sure you like and subscribe. We love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media. Today's crossover episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. You can visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is JT Wistersill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by the host of Locked On Cougs, Parker Ainsworth. And Parker, this is a game that coming into the year as a Utah fan, I viewed much differently than I do right now. Biggest thing for Utah is they don't have an offense. We'll see if the change at offensive coordinator with Andy Ludwig stepping down, Mike Bajakian, who's got some experience as the OC at Northwestern for a few years, can impact the play of the offensive play and just help out Isaac Wilson. But that's where Utah's at going into this, coming off 3 straight losses for the first time since 2017. How's Houston feeling right now?
Well, the last one for Houston feels like it was 3 straight in one afternoon. I think that truthfully, we knew there was this gauntlet stretch where you had Kansas and Utah, and you've got Kansas State the week after, and everyone knew coming into the year this is going to be a tough stretch of the season. And then about 10, 15 days ago, we were like, oh, like that's actually maybe not as bad. Utah's a little dinged up. Kansas isn't what we thought they were, and then Kansas beat us like we thought they might have back in July. Houston's rebuilding. I don't mean to say that there's no hope or anything. It's obviously early on in that process, but now it's hard to tell what to expect. Anyway, I have a lot of questions about Utah, and so I'm glad we get to sit down and do this because it's a perplexing program to say the least right now.
It's wild, and I'm curious right away. Please fire away with one of your questions.
Well, obviously, the quarterback injury, Cam Rising, that dramatically changes everything. And it's, a couple weeks into that part of your season at this point. Do you feel like there's a path for Isaac Wilson to kind of grow into a guy that can manage he's a true freshman, right? Like this is not what he was going to be asked to do initially. But is there a shot that he grows into a guy that can lead this program to a little bit more success this year, or is it just kind of going to be a growing pains year?
I think he can lead them to a little more success than he did against TCU. Utah is not a Big 12 contender anymore, and that pains me to say, but it has been made painfully obvious with the way the offense has looked over the last 3 weeks. This is a Utah team. They're averaging 14 points per game. When Cam Rising was fully healthy, this team averaged 38 points per game back in 2022. That feels like a lifetime ago, and this Utah offense is struggling. The biggest issue, in my opinion, wasn't even the play calling. It's been the play of Wilson. It's just tough. You get a true freshman in there, and he just hasn't been able to execute, hasn't been able to make throws on time. Yes, the play calling hasn't always been perfect. The offensive line is underwhelmed. Receivers haven't always been able to get open, and even the running game at times, it's not been perfect. But at the end of the day, if Utah had a quarterback who was making throws on time, this offense would be at least over 20 points per game.
So you mentioned this shift of offensive coordinator. I actually did a segment on it earlier this week, so that was interesting that they had a guy on staff that has been like a career offensive coordinator. That's a kind of a nice thing to just have in your back pocket. What kind of things do you expect him to change and do differently? Because he's been in that system. They don't have like a lot of time to implement a lot of new stuff, but he's also not the same coordinator.
Yeah, there's been that whole joke made about how Nick Saban has a bunch of like analysts of like former coaches and everything at his disposal back when he was at Bama. That's what ended up happening with Utah. Mike Bajakian, the former Northwestern OC, decided to come on, be an analyst. And he even said, I came here to learn from Andy Ludwig. Ludwig then steps down, and he's the one with the only one, I believe, on staff with that play calling experience. So he gets then, okay, you've been working one-on-one with the quarterbacks all year. Andy Ludwig was in the box. So when Wilson would come off to the sideline, he has always been talking with Bajakian. So that gives me encouragement. Like, okay, they have a nice rapport. What is expected to change? can't reinvent the wheel in a week. Utah's their bye week next week, so maybe they'll try to make a few more tweaks and changes. I just think something that's got to change is you got to use motion more effectively. The best offenses in college football and just in football in general right now, look at the NFL level, utilize motion more to put defenses in a bind. And I mean a true bind. Utah will motion an extra tight end in just to help like give them extra body in the box to block. But I'm talking about motioning receivers, moving them around so you can stretch and do different things against coverages. And I do think that's something that Utah has to take more advantage of. I think utilizing that will help Isaac a lot more. Got to continue to leave 6-7 man protections in because Wilson's pocket presence is abysmal right now. More short routes and just continue to make it simpler for him so that he doesn't have to make too many reads. You have to do a lot to overcome what is poor quarterback play right now. And speaking of quarterback play, Parker, that's why I'm very curious.
Speaking of poor quarterback play,
I didn't want to do that and make the Houston fans right away. But speaking of quarterback play, that may not be the most ideal. What is the latest on Houston's QB room?
Yeah, so for Locked On Utes fans that are maybe getting acquainted with Houston, Donovan Smith started every game last year, had surgery on his shoulder. That's hard to say 3 times fast. In the offseason, missed all of the spring. New coaching staff comes in. Obviously, they fired Dana Holgorsen last winter. He's still, I think, kind of on a pitch count at practice where he's like not throwing Mondays and stuff. Anyway, he's a great kid, but he regressed. He's not as good this year as he was last year. Blame it on whatever you want to blame it on. New offense, bad arm, never healthy, whatever, right? So he has a bad first few weeks out. They make the shift to Zion Chris, and Zion lights it up against TCU. I mean, he 71-yard run. He hit 22 miles an hour running in that. He also had a touchdown pass. I think it was a second drive technically of the game. Looks a lot better. Comes out against Kansas. First couple drives look flat, and then he comes out, and we never see him again, and we don't find out until after the game there was something wrong with his hamstring. He is Zion Chris, the guy that I mentioned, is projected to start this weekend. He's a younger quarterback, transferred in from Louisiana, formerly Louisiana Lafayette. And he is, when I say hit, 71-yard run, hit 22 miles an hour, he is fast. He's long strides fast, but he is fast. And it really kind of adds a dynamic to the offense, at least TCU couldn't handle. And so that's, I think, what we're hoping to see more of this weekend. But he also hurt his hamstring last week. So I don't really know what to tell you to expect because I don't know that they know where they're going to be when they wake up on Saturday.
This game is so interesting because you could look at it from a number of angles. Number one, Utah's lost 3 straight games. Their offense is currently only averaging 14 points per game. But then you're also looking at a Houston team that, if you look at 3 of their last 4 games, they've lost by more than 20 points. But that win in there is TCU, which then we can play the rock, paper, scissors game, right? Of TCU beat Utah, but then TCU also beat Kansas, and then you guys beat TCU, as we mentioned, but then Kansas beats up on TCU, but then Kansas beats up on you guys.
I don't mean to brag here, but last week, y'all lost 13-7, and Houston is averaging a whopping 13.7 points per game this year. So I'm feeling all right. I'm feeling okay.
If you, for some reason, Parker, ever decided to torture yourself during this week and turn on the Utah offensive film from the last week, you would be feeling fantastic right now. And it's going to be very interesting to see. I think it was our friends Drake Toll and Spencer McLaughlin talking about this game, and they were just talking about how it's going to be like a sickos college football community type of like defensive grudge match. And I was like, I wish I could say they were wrong, but they very well may be right. And then that's what we have no idea how this game is going to play out in some ways because both offenses have the potential to do some things, but both teams are led by strong defenses, both defense being ranked inside the top 30 in total yards. So that's what I want to do in a moment is start break down the key matchups on both sides of the ball. And we will be discussing those shortly. But first, we want to tell you about something we have going on at the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And that's not all. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And that's FanDuel.com. We got the World Series gearing up. NHL hockey is back. College football is still in the full swing. NFL too. But let's really talk about this matchup. Utah versus Houston. On FanDuel right now, Utah is favored by 3.5. Parker, I want to start with you. How are you feeling about this line?
I'm taking Houston in the points. Obviously, I think Houston's got a path to victory here. I'm more interested, and I'm assuming you're taking Utah. I shouldn't, but I'm interested in what
You're
you think about
smart, man.
this over under set at 36.5. I weirdly still might hit the under. What are you looking at that like?
Man. Right now. Okay, originally, I'll go barely over, just barely. I'll go barely over, but I could totally see this going under. And we're all just like, we feel like we wasted our Saturdays watching this game because I don't want to do the thing where I'm like being like, oh, the defense are going to perform poorly. Like, I think the defenses are going to perform fine, but I hope the offenses for both teams just do something. I just want an entertaining game. I do not want a Broncos versus Colts Thursday night football game, Matt Ryan versus Russell Wilson type. And the fear and the potential of that existing is unfortunately a little real, Parker. So I could definitely see myself hitting the under at the end of the day too.
I'm feeling like the under to be like 17-14. Something that just feels too good to be true.
It does. It does. However you guys are leaning, make sure you head over to FanDuel Sportsbook and get it on that great offer today. All right, keeping our crossover moving, let's start talking about keys on both sides of the ball. I'm going to start with Utah's offense versus Houston's defense. This is a Houston defense that has been doing some good things overall. We mentioned they're ranked 26th in terms of total yards. Did not perform well against Kansas. And I will even say Utah's first half in particular was not good against TCU. The fact that they only held TCU to 13 is still wild to think about when you think about, especially early, there was like blocked field goals, and there was really bad turnover in the red zone by TCU. Like, TCU should have had more points in that game, but Utah tightened up later in the second half and really ended up shutting down the Horned Frogs and everything they were trying to do. But this is a new week now for this Utah offense, and the Utah offense did not get anything going. They got one 70-yard touchdown pass to Money Parks, and that was it. Biggest key for me in this one is you have to run the ball. And Utah was able to run the ball a little bit, but not as a strong of level as I think they would have hoped. So Utah has to run the ball. Kansas had success running the ball. Micah Bernard's one of the best backs in college football. So that's the biggest thing for Utah. And then we talked about it a little bit and just like my differences for what I expect this Utah offense to look like. You just have to continue to make life easy for Isaac Wilson and also protect him, because under pressure, he's not going to perform well. He's going to get sacked more times than not. And Utah's got to put him in favorable third down situations. If it's third and long, it's going to be a long game for Utah.
Well, and it's interesting because both of those things, running the ball and protecting the quarterback, require offensive line play. And I feel like a big thing for Houston's going to be defensive line play getting back to what it was before Kansas. Two of their better players are transferring, Carlos Allen from Kennesaw State at nose tackle, and Keith Cooper, who came with Coach Willie Fritz from Tulane at defensive end. I think Keith Cooper is going to be playing on Sundays, and I think he wanted to come play at the Big 12 to show that. He's had a really strong year. Kansas game aside, where I think he played okay, but the team did not play well on defense. They had a pretty strong defensive front for most of the year. People talk about the close game against Oklahoma, but even like Iowa State was 3-0 until almost the end of the third quarter. This defense is kind of the linchpin of Houston, and it's mostly been that front seven. Utah obviously is to their backup quarterback, and that adds a whole different like variable to this. Has the offensive line played like that in the past, or are you just hoping that they play better this week than they maybe did against TCU?
Hoping they play better. I think the tackles have been really good overall on the season. Interior, a little bit of a down game. I know Pro Football Focus was really hard on the offensive line. I still looked more times than not like a lot of the sacks were on Wilson, I believed. I think one thing Utah has to do better, their tight ends and like the running backs there, and Micah Bernard's been awesome, but there were times where their blitz pickup was an issue, or like you have a defensive end matched up on a tight end. TCU got that, and that's obviously a mismatch for the tight end. So to me, the offensive line, I expect them to, it was a down game by a little bit of their standards, but I expect them to bounce back. I think that will be a good battle in the trenches, and I'm very curious to see if Micah Bernard is able to go over 100 yards, right? Both these teams coming off frustrating performances on each side of the ball, and even in this matchup, even though we talked about the good things that Houston was able to do. So very curious to see how Wilson performs in this atmosphere. Parker, anything else you wanted to highlight on this side of the ball?
Well, I think one thing Houston's got to do themselves, obviously, is win the takeaway battle. Obviously, they had Donovan Smith.
Interceptions, I will say. So the odds of you getting at least one pick on this game,
when you look at Houston's only won 2 games this year. They beat TCU and they beat Rice, but in both of those, they're able to forced turnovers. And then if I'm being blunt, they lucked into not losing their own, both against TCU and Rice. They had fumbles that just Houston was able to fall on and kind of hold on to the football. So they helped win the turnover battle in that instance. Obviously the freshman quarterback, I don't mean to talk too poorly on him and jinx myself, but I'd imagine he has trouble holding on to it a little bit. But receivers and holding on to it after catch, or running backs, what can you tell me about Utah and ball security? Is that something? Is Houston going to have to punch it out, or has it been a problem? Because you hadn't scored a lot of points.
Yes. No, honestly, it's just been a lack of moving the ball, and then penalties and taking poor sacks, taking yourself out of field goal range. I'm trying to figure out the last time. Like, I think Micah Bernard did fumble once, but if I remember correctly, Utah got on it and maybe lost. But like fumbling, and that has not been a big issue for this team. We have not had players fumble. More than anything, it's been interceptions. Wilson interception in the last game too. I think he only threw one against. I'm trying to remember now, but it was not a terrible interception. It was like a 4th down. There was nowhere to go with the ball. Right. He had to throw it up there. But the biggest issue with him has just been but he's also had some terrible. There was a one against Arizona. His interception was so bad. It was just like, what are you doing? And like, he even knew it as soon as he let it go out of his hands. And it's just the hard part about breaking in a freshman quarterback. So that's where Utah will have to do a better job in this game. Like, I mean, it's unrealistic to expect no turnovers from this offense just based on how they've looked recently. But like, you cannot turn it over in key spots because, as you just said, Parker, if Utah doesn't turn it over in this game, the probability of them winning is high, in my opinion.
Well, and obviously some way to take care of throwing interception would be running the ball. You said a key would be running the ball. New offensive coordinator, do you anticipate running the ball more times this game? I mean, I don't think you're going to be behind the sticks too much in terms of scoring to need to throw it, but what do you anticipate out of the new play calling?
I think it'll be a similar amount of I think they'll try to run it as much as they can, but also just especially in the world of when we have analytics available to us, a 2nd and long run is not an efficient play. So that's where if Utah doesn't get much on first down, I expect them to look to the passing game. And I would love if Utah tried to incorporate more screens to Micah Bernard. He's someone who's been, in the past few years, he's done more of his damage through the air than on the ground. And then this year, he's really exploded as a runner. So that's an area where I would love to see Utah utilize that game more. And I do think this is a team that wants to run. I think they'd love it to be 70-30, honestly. I think expecting more 60-40 is more ideal. If it's 50-50, then that's concerning for Utah with the way Wilson has performed over the last few weeks. So it'll be interesting to watch and see how Wilson looks.
Well, and Isaac Wilson, son of Zach Wilson, there's probably an entire
brother.
Sorry, brother. Yeah. Utah, you got to make sure you double that.
His dad played at Utah too, so they have a whole the Wilson family's been very successful in the state.
I would actually think that's where my head was at when I was talking off the cuff there. But I want to say there's probably a lot of pressure on this kid because his brother was so good. You mentioned the dad as well. We're talking bad about him because his freshman year he's been thrown into the fire a little early. But in the long term, you'd imagine he turned out to be the guy, right? He's going to have a coming out party against somebody.
I think the potential for him is still very high. If I was Utah right now, I'm still I would love to bring in a veteran in spring ball and just let them battle it out and see who would win the job. But you're also 1000% right. I think everything we're saying about Wilson is just fair criticism. We're not saying anything that's untrue. It's just a matter of fact, he hasn't played very well right now, but there's way too much on his plate. And more than anything, I blame what's happened to Utah than the coaches and not having a better backup quarterback plan than thrusting a true freshman into this spot. Wilson has done some nice things, but they have put him in a poor position by asking him to. This was supposed to be the year Utah won the Big 12, made the college football playoff, all that. When Cam got hurt, those expectations fell on the shoulders of a true freshman who, at this time last year, he was still playing high school ball. That's really tough to make that steep of a jump against 20 5-year-olds.
Well, 25-year-olds being your own quarterback, but until you start talking about winning the Big 12, you sounded like a lot of my commenters that were like, this is on the coaches for not bringing in a different guy taking the snaps. Houston's had their trouble at quarterback, and I mentioned Zion's a strong runner. There are people that criticize his arm. There are people that want the third-string quarterback, ULA, to play a lot more because he had a touchdown in the garbage time moments against UNLV earlier this year. It feels like the ever-evolving question in college football. There's just a lot more teams than there are guys that can realistically play quarterback at the Power 4 level. It's just hard to do. We got to get into who wins in a moment, but you're feeling pretty confident. So you think Isaac Wilson does it okay, or you assume they're going to run the ball well?
I think Wilson will play better in this game. I think Mike Bajakian will do a better job of making things easier for Isaac because he knows it so well. They've had just so many opportunities now where it's like, okay, why are we struggling so much? Like I know Utah's offense is never going to be that good this year, but like I gotta believe. Here's what I want out of Utah's offense. I want 2 drives that end in touchdowns. That is such a low bar in the current world of college football. They got 1 last week. I'm asking for 2 this week. And honestly, we'll probably need a defensive touchdown just to make me feel even extra better about this whole game and scenario too. But that's how I look at it from Utah. And I do think Wilson, I still trust he has talent. He's shown the ability to make throws at times. And because of that, I still think he's going to be able to do some things. Utah is not going to bounce back with a 40-point performance this game. That is not happening. But I do think there will be a couple drives where Wilson is able to connect on a few more key plays. The Utah offense as a whole will be better, and I do expect them to have some success moving the ball in Houston. I think overall for this game, the Houston defense will leave saying, hey, we allowed 2 touchdowns, maybe a field goal drive. That's what I'm going to give Utah. I think Utah will score 17 points on offense. And I think if you're Houston, you're like, okay, that means we did our job defensively. So just a couple good drives for Utah, some runs, some Wilson doing his things. But you mentioned it, Parker. We got to also talk about the other side of the ball. And that's what we have to do in one moment. But first, we have to discuss our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sporting action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings. Prize Picks has made the daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long with Prize Pick. You can now head over to Prize Picks, and it's the best place to get real money on sports action. You can join over 10 million users and sign up today. Want to play Prize Picks along celebrities like Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champ Sean O'Malley? You can now find community plays under the promo tabs of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community. You can sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Think Justin Jefferson will get more than 83.5 yards tonight, basically, when he's in action? I sure hope so. I'm a Vikings fan. How about Christian McCaffrey? You think he's going to run for more than 70 or 75.5 yards? Well, that is if he ever comes back and gets healthy. But you can cook up hot takes with your friends with real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Game Picks. Now you got to go over and download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, that's all caps, no spaces, Locked On College to get $50 instantly and when you play your first $5 lineup on the app today. Head over to Prize Picks today. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Parker, switching over to the other side of the ball. What do you think about this side? And did you want to add anything else to the offensive one after what I said?
Well, no, I think it's like you said, the first team to 17 probably wins this game.
Yes. Yes.
It's really going to be that low scoring. It's interesting that we're doing this segment after a Prize Picks run your game ad, because I think we're also both saying that the team that runs the ball best wins the game. I feel like that's kind of Houston's thing, is that they can kind of grind down the Utah defense. It might be 0-0 in the third, but eventually, Big Uglies get tired of you leaning on them over and over and over again.
Don't put that evil on us, please. Don't give me no scores at halftime. I don't even care. Houston's give up 10-0. Like, just don't give me nothing. Don't do that to me. I can't take it anymore, Parker. We already lost 3 in a row.
We played almost 3 full quarters of 3-0 football with Iowa State. I don't want to hear it out of you. No, I think that it's going to be who runs the ball best, and it might not pop off till late. I think Houston having a running quarterback is an advantage in that, because it's just one more threat with the ball.
Struggled with a running quarterback recently in Sam Levitt. Before he got hurt against Arizona State, Levitt made plays with his legs to move the chains on 3rd and long.
Well, and then they've got the best running back name. We don't even quite like that in our lineup there in Scatabo. But I think that truthfully, that's going to be, if Chris really can go and if he really can run, that's a big advantage for Houston in this football game. And that's unfortunately something we might not, this game kicks off at 6:30 local time. We might not know that until 6:35, right? Like, honestly, it could just work out like that with the hamstring injury. Those can be a little weird. You're equally confident in what you all got running the football, though, it sounds like.
Parker, I don't know how familiar you are with some of Utah and their quarterback injuries and how it's monitored, but Utah fans are so used to having to wait till the very last minute until they figure out if a quarterback is going to play. So this will not be a strange experience for them not knowing which Houston quarterback we're going to see out there. But yeah, I think looking at this matchup from the Houston offense versus the Utah defense, I am very curious when you mentioned the quarterback swap, because like you said, when you look at the numbers against Kansas, that game is not good what Smith was able to do. But Chris, I know he threw the interception, and this is still a Houston team that we're seeing what they can kind of do, right? Looking at things like Muse, you mentioned him earlier, having 6 receptions for 99 yards. Can he build on that type of a performance? Can Chris give this offense the spark and generate they need? And Utah should have given up more points, as I mentioned, against TCU, but this is a Utah defensive line that does a good job. Like, it's hard to run in between the tackles on them for the most part, unless they're playing Scattaboo, and then you're going to get whatever you want.
You get whatever you want. Yeah. So was it just that Scattaboo's that good? What went wrong for Utah in that one? Because I'm going to send the notes over to Fritz and them, so I got to know what to send them. What was wrong in that one?
I think the biggest thing, because he actually broke 2 runs in that game. So if you take that away, like, he ended up with 150 yards. If you take that away, when I say take that away too, like, I want to put that in perspective. So many people do that and we're like, oh, he was under 100 yards rushing. No. If you play that out like the normal drive, still probably gets to like 115 yards. But for the most part, like, I would have been pleased with Utah's effort for that. They did a pretty good job for the most part, but then just like those 2 plays in particular, awful tackling by players who were backups and just not the most experienced. Utah's linebackers are getting back healthy. Korene Reed's back for this team coming into the year. He was one of the best linebackers in college football, according to Pro Football Focus. Him and Lander Barton are one of the top duos. I still believe they do a lot of good things together, maybe not at that level so far on the year. And Utah safety, they had a guy in Rabbit Evans who he did some nice things in that game, but he missed a couple big tackles. Teo Johnson missed some tackles, but they've corrected that. They were better about that against TCU than they were against Arizona State, which is why you saw a big run or like a big gain or two, but no like game-breaking runs. And you look at the types of runs that Scattaboo broke. Like, those are the only him and like Ashton Gentry, a very small list of guys who could have stayed on their feet from the contact they maintained. So overall, I do think this Utah rush defense is pretty good. This is a Utah team right now that is tied for 43rd nationally at 120 yards per game. So their run defense, it's slightly better than Houston. Houston's 145 yards on the ground, which is 72nd per game, but both teams in top 100 there. We already talked about how good both these defenses are, but I do think the biggest thing is just, it's a lot of long methodical drives, because you don't have a Scattaboo type. If you want to beat this Utah team, it's, hey, let's try to get in 3rd and manageable. Let's see if we can run the ball, because you can run the ball on Utah. They're not a top 20 run defense. They're 43rd, as we said. So run the ball in a couple of key spots, and then you need your players to win a few times outside, as well as protect Chris. Utah's pass rush has not been good with the loss of Connor O'Toole. One of their top pass rushers just hasn't played as much as of late. So there's definitely a world, and I think it's likely that Houston does have success moving the ball in the same way of, like I said, with Utah, right? Like, it's not going to be consistent movement by either offense, but I do believe both sides will put together touchdown drives in this game.
Well, and I've said all year, I think Houston's got a really strong and underutilized or underserved wide receiver room. I think like Joseph Manjack is a guy that was really good last year. This year having a little bit more struggles because they're not throwing the ball very well. Micah Muse comes over from Georgia. Finally had a good game against Kansas, but it feels like it was all for naught, because that was about all that went right for Houston against Kansas. I could, Boogie Johnson, the Oklahoma State transfer's got some real speed to him, etc. If Houston were to try to air it out, what about the back half of Utah's defense? Is that a vulnerability? Can Houston maybe finally get those things going, or are y'all not the guys for that?
I don't think overall we are. I will say, like, you can beat this Utah secondary. You have to make good throws consistently, which is where I think Chris will make a throw. I think it's hard to believe consistently. Like, I give Hoover credit on a couple drives. He was able to pick Utah apart, but then you also saw, like, he wasn't able to. Noah Fafita in that game, Arizona was able to win because late Noah Fafita made some NFL big time throws. That's where I don't think Chris will be able to do that, but I do think he'll be able to make a play or two on this group, because it's defensive backs that do get beat, but not consistently enough. That's why Utah was able to hold TCU to only 13 points. Like I said, should have been a little bit more, But overall in that game, the Utah defense did do a really good job, especially in the second half. They played well enough. The offense just squandered it. It's a defense that's got some talented and experienced defensive backs. When you look at a guy like Micah Vaughn, Teo Johnson, I still think he's one of the better safeties in the Big 12, even if he's not playing as strongly as of late. This is a good Utah defense overall. They will get beat on a drive or two. They're not going to shut Houston down completely, I believe. But I do believe there's a world where they hold Houston to like, hey, one touchdown and a field goal. I do think that is very possible because even though they've had lapses overall, they're a very strong unit. And Morgan Scalley's the head coach in waiting at Utah. He does a really good job with this group too. He's a good DC, still talented players there. I do give Utah the advantage on this side of the ball.
All right. I'm going 17-14 Cougs. I'm taking the under. What you got?
Well, if neither team gets to 20, then that's where, like we talked about earlier, do not bet the over. Also, I don't know what I'm probably going to throw something at my TV if that's the case, and I have to watch a 17-14 type of game. Unless the defenses are playing like it's such a high, beautiful level, like we love football. But I'm going to go Utah 24, Houston 13. Some of you may be going, whoa, JT, that's a lot of points for the way your offenses look. Here's the thing. The offense, last week they put together one touchdown drive. What's good? The new offensive coordinator change going to lead to just 2 offensive touchdowns. One other time, Utah's going to get a field goal. I think that will be set up off a Houston turnover and the other touchdown, because if we're doing the math, Parker, you're a teacher, so you know my math hasn't added up quite yet. Utah will get a defensive touchdown this game, whether it's off a fumble or an interception. This is a Houston team that's turned it over 14 times, 4 interceptions in the last game. I know you said you're not expecting Smith to play. I think the Utah defense really steps up in this one. They hold Houston to 2 field goals and they give up a touchdown on another one. Utah 24-13. So I finally get a good night's rest on a Saturday night.
You just more than tripled your point output for a week. Like, come on.
Well, like I said, if we look back on the TCU game, right? Like they only had 7, yes, but all I said was one more touchdown. That's not that crazy by the offense. One other drive in field goal range. So that's literally only 10. That's 2 over the course of a college football game, 2 other successful drives, and then 1 defensive touchdown is all I'm asking.
You're rooting for your eyeballs. You just want to watch more touchdowns.
I want to watch some touchdowns. I watched 1 touchdown last week. 1. Parker, I expected so much of this Utah team. Do you know how hard this is for me to be in this position?
We've been waiting for basketball season for a minute now.
I'm not waiting for basketball. We were picked in the bottom of the preseason poll, Parker. We don't have that hope. This was supposed to be our Houston basketball, and this is the position I sit in.
On that
note. But this is going to be a wild game. This was a lot of fun, Parker. Really enjoyed shooting this with you. We'll see how the game all plays out. Any last messages before we get out of here?
No, I will say we're both live post game. I'm sure that means people will be bouncing back and forth, drinking tears out of one of them and celebrating in the other. But obviously, it's a fun game because it could be a close competitive game, even if it is solo scoring, and that at least like makes the stakes being higher. I think makes it more fun late for sure.
I agree with that. I do expect it to be. I do not think, even though I said Utah, I think will win by 11 in my prediction, Houston will be always in the game to me. And same thing with Utah. I don't think they pull away in this one to get to that mark until late. But either way, we're done talking about it for tonight. We'll each have one more show coming up on Friday. Make sure you guys keep it at Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougs, this crossover edition in the books. But we'll be coming back with more content tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.